Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Over the past 10 years, you've probably heard more about your gut health and the microbiome than you probably ever imagined. I want to talk about what the microbiome actually is, why it does have such an impact on our overall health, and what you can be doing to make sure that you are maintaining your gut microbiome. So I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and let's get right to it. Let's talk about what is the microbiome? We keep hearing about this. Like I said, over the probably last decade, this has really kind of gained a lot of momentum. And part of the reason is because there is so much scientific research looking at specific individual bacterias and how those bacterias can either positively or negatively impact our health. So what we know the microbiome actually is, it's this environment. It's a community of these microbes or bacteria. So it's the genetic material within even those bacteria that live within the human body. And this is predominantly within the intestines. And there are hundreds of different strains of bacteria that exist within the individual human microbiome environment. So each individual person, your bacterias can vary from one person to the next. And this is always important to notate, because we know that there are common bacteria that are found in all people, but sometimes we can have maybe a lot more of one and not enough of another. So we have to look at different factors that contribute to microbiome development and what can actually impact this or disturb the normal homeostasis. So we know that different factors that impact the microbiome starts right at birth. So even when we're looking at vaginal births versus cesarean sections, and we know that going through a vaginal birth actually helps to strengthen the microbial environment within the baby. And this is an important factor. So we do recognize this now. And so scientific research has been able to show the importance of those different microbes or the little bacteria that we get exposed to as soon as we enter this world. We can look at different dietary patterns, and certainly we know that certain bugs, certain bacteria thrive in unhealthy foods, such as we can look at sugar, for example. We know that some of the more unfriendly bacteria really do have a tendency to replicate and grow and take over when you are following more of that standard American diet, as opposed to looking at foods that contain high fiber, which can really help to create more of that balance or that homeostasis within your microbial environment. So there's a lot of different things that can play a role into this. We can look at hormones, we can look at antibiotic use. Certainly that can create a dysbiosis. They've done some interesting studies where they have shown that even short-term antibiotic use, say 3, 4, 5 days, and how much just in that 5 days, how much the microbial environment can actually shift. And so oftentimes it will come back to its normal place, but if you are following that standard American diet, it may take much longer. And in that lapse, that lag time, this is when you can be potentially exposed due to lower immunity. Because we know one thing about those bacteria is that they are there to help to maintain our immune system. And we know that there are so many different health effects that have been associated now with an imbalance of the gut microbiome. So when we look at different things like allergies, for example, seasonal allergies, when we look at obesity. They have been able to now narrow down specific bacteria that are more prone to leading to obesity. We can look at issues with mood health, depression, for example. Certainly when we look at something like SIBO, which is the small intestine bacterial overgrowth. So there's a lot of different things that are going to impact the microbial environment. And what we're trying to do is to maintain a healthy microbiome throughout our lives. So how do we do this? Well, one of the things that we do is we incorporate good high fiber foods. So if we adhere to a Mediterranean diet, then we are more likely to be able to achieve that goal. We want to make sure that we have adequate omega-3 fatty acids, fermented foods. That's why oftentimes you hear about, the taking in your diet things like yogurt and sauerkraut, for example, miso. These are all things that we know, these fermented food, that help to kind of prime and promote a healthier microbial environment. And then, of course, we can be utilizing probiotics. So probiotics are basically what they are is they're living microorganisms. So they're going to be the bacteria. So the common ones that you will see are things like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. So within those subspecies is where we start to gain those benefits. And they've been able to actually narrow down specified strains of bacteria for specified health concerns. So for digestive health, we now realize that there are certain strains of healthy bacteria that you can obtain via probiotic supplementation that are very, very beneficial, like Lactobacillus rhamnosus, for example. And then we look at cardiovascular health, and we can see that things like Lactobacillus acidophilus, very helpful and supportive when it comes to maintaining cardiovascular health. We can look at Lactobacillus plantarum, and we know that this also very beneficial when it comes to maintaining cardiovascular microbial environment. We can look at skin health and look at it Bifidobacterium bifidum. We can look at the respiratory system and overall immune health, and we know that Lactobacillus rhamnosus once again comes to play. So when we start to narrow down these individual strains of bacteria and then we compile them together, and we have a multi-strain probiotic such as the probiotic HX, which contains your Lactobacillus rhamnosus. It contains Bifidobacterium brevi. It has Lactobacillus plantarum in it. It has your Bifidobacterium animalis subspecies Lactus BSO1. These are all very specific bacteria that we know have their own specific role in the body for maintaining our health. And so I know it's sometimes unusual to think like, okay, these little bugs are meant to keep us healthy. Yes, indeed they are. And in our probiotic HX, we actually have lactospore, which is a Bacillus coagulans, but a very unique form of the Bacillus coagulans, because what lactospore actually is a clinically validated probiotic strain, and it has that lactic acid producing Bacillus coagulans in it. And the reason why this is very important is because when we look at the thermostability and we look at the ability for those bacteria to make their way through the GI tract and lay down into the intestines to be able to do what we need them to do, oftentimes substandard probiotics don't usually cut it. And you can find a lot of probiotics out there on the market, but their overall efficacy is usually not that high. But when we're using something that contains lactospores, such as what we find in the probiotic HX, we know, because this has been shown in clinical research in terms of its overall stability. So we know it can make it through those gastric acid juices, and it has a strong resistance to not being able to be broken down or have those bacteria die off once it hits the gastric juices. And this is important because we want to be able to utilize the Bacillus coagulans for its functionality within the body to support our immune system and brain health. And when we think about cardiovascular health, all of the different ways in which we know that our healthy bacteria help to promote our overall wellness. So they actually did a study, and this was in the Bioscience, Biotechnology, and Biochemistry journal, looking at the lactospore specifically and showing just how powerful this strain of bacteria actually is because of its excellent resistance to that gastric acid environment as well as to high temperature environments. So this is really important because many times what happens is certain bacteria are more prone to dying off if they're not kept at a cold temperature. Well, what we know about the lactospore is that it can actually thrive and survive even in higher temperatures, which is really important because then it makes this particular formulation shelf stable, which means that you don't have to keep it refrigerated. So when we think about maintaining our microbiome and understanding that the human body is really so much reliant on these different microbes. When we look at our skin, when we look at digestive tract, when we look at our airways, when we look at our eyes, ears, they all have their own unique microbial ecosystem. And to be able to maintain those by taking a multi-strain probiotic such as the probiotic HX really does help to enhance our overall well-being. And this is what we are going after at the end of the day, is to have a very broad spectrum microbial environment, but one that is promoting health, not deterring from health. And so incorporating a probiotic into your daily routine does so much for your overall digestive health when we look at just creating balance throughout the different organ systems, including the skin. For example, many times people will start to utilize probiotic HX and they start to see that their skin feels much healthier. And this is part of that reason why, is because when we have that blend of all of those different strains of bacteria, they work synergistically together to really promote and optimize overall wellness within the intestines, which then promotes wellness throughout the entire body. So I just wanted to give you a basic overview of our probiotic HX today and talk a little bit about the microbiome because it is oftentimes brought up and sometimes people still go, what is the microbiome? Well, that's that 2 to 4 pounds of bacteria that you are carrying around with you each and every single day. And the goal is to make sure that the majority of those bacteria are of the healthy variety. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health Podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health Podcast.